refuses to shoot, and then NAFTA kills himself. That, fortunately, will not happen today. I double-checked, they don't have a gun. They even do not have a fake gun, which they will have here in Amsterdam. No fake guns. So, welcome everybody at today's Magic Mountain. And please do give a very warm welcome to Leonafta, also known as Alexander Duggin, and Ludovico Settembrini, also known as Bernard-Henri Levy. Thank you.
So, first of all, I always prefer the battle of ideas to the physical war. And I am very, very happy that we could exchange with Mr. Bernard-Henri Levy, who is famous on the world scale, not in the physical duel, because sometimes we are in the same front line, normally on different sides in the physical battle. So I prefer to speak and to exchange the idea here, not in the physical battle. Maybe it is the only way to avoid that, or at least to try. First of all, I would like to say that now President Macron recently has said that the hegemony of the West is over. The same thing about liberalism, or global liberalism, has said our president, Mr. Putin. There was recently the issue of foreign affairs with Fareed Zakaria article dedicated to the decline of Western power. And I think that it is something I'm going to discuss. In my eyes, it is almost obvious that there is such decline. In your book, Empire, Five Kings, you have noticed a very interesting thing, evaporizing of American presence in the Middle East in the case of Kurds. I think that we are approaching the end, not to the end of the history, as Mr. Fukuyama has said, but the end of political modernity. And that is the end of something very, very important that we should think, and that the end of Western hegemony, of American dominance, or globalism, global liberalism. It is something historical in itself, it's not technical. I interpret that as, for example, in Nietzsche words. So, in the beginning of the modernity, the humans have killed the God in order to liberate. But that was suicide. Killing the God, we have killed ourselves. And now, welcome to the last stage of nihilism. And it's interesting, in your book, you define, Mr. Levy, American empire, or global liberal system, as the system of nihilism, based on nothing. It's a very interesting idea, and I would like to ask you why you still defend this more and more open nihilist system, why you fight for this decaying, declining modernity, and why you invest all your intellectual power in order to defend that.
Of course, I'm certainly not fighting for nihilism. I'm fighting, on the contrary, to combat nihilism. I'm fighting for political modernity because, in my words, it means democracy, freedom, equality between women and men, secularism, and so on. Political modernity, which is probably in crisis. I refuse the idea of its decline and of its disappearance because I strongly believe that it is a plus for the world. And about nihilism, I read you too since long. You are my adversary. We think oppositely on many fields, but I recognize your importance, especially on the Russian scene. And for me, That's why I read you carefully. For me, the embodiment of nihilism today is you and your friends and the Eurasian current and this morbid atmosphere which fills your books and the way in which you dissolve the very idea of human rights, of personal freedoms, of singularities in some big blocks of community, big faith, sacred origins, or so on. There is a perfume of nihilism that really embarrasses me when I read your Révolution conservatrice, and all your works about Eurasia since the beginning of the 90s.
So, but interesting. If you make a kind of identity between nihilism and refuse to the Western interpretation of human rights, freedom, and democracy, liberal democracy, so in that sense, I agree. I am against that because for me, it is not they are not universal values. First of all, I think that democracy, the content of democracy, is changing. I have spoken once with Fukuyama, and Fukuyama defined the modern understanding of liberal democracy as the rule of the minorities against the majority, because majority can always transform into populism and fascism or communism. So that is completely new idea, I think. And I think that if I don't share this new understanding of liberal democracy, or if, for example, I challenge that the subject of the freedom should be individual, and that is the essence, the axis of human rights ideology, if I consider the identity of the man, of human culture, of society, not to be reducible to individuality. So, for example, in our Russian tradition, the subject of freedom or the subject, human subject, is not individual, it is collective. And that was in the time of Tsars, that was defined by church, after that by communism, but always collective identity was dominant in our culture, as well as in China, in this culture, in Indian culture, up to the same level in the Islamic culture. But I think that I'm nihilist in the sense that I refuse universality of the modern Western value. I don't think they are universal. I think they are Western, they are modern. I think the West is very powerful still in order to defend them, but I just challenge that is the only way to interpret democracy as the rule of minorities against majority, the only way to interpret the freedom as individual freedom, the only way to interpret human rights, projecting Western, modern, individualistic version of human on the other culture. That's my opinion.
You know your tradition, the Russian tradition, better than me, but I'm enough a friend of Russia to know that what you said about the place of subjectivity in Russian tradition is not true. You have also a tradition of Herzen, of Pushkin, of Turgenev, a part of Sakharov, all the glorious tradition of the dissidents who fought the totalitarianism of the Soviet Union, who fought in the name of individuality, rights of the subjects, and human rights. And this element, you cannot say that it is not part of the Russian tradition. And again, you know, I devoted such a big part of my life to defend Russia against slavery, totalitarianism, and so on, to be authorized to say that. Democracy, Fukuyama, I was not here during your debate with Fukuyama, but I suppose what I would say, at least myself, is that democracy is a complex concept and a complex process. It is the rule of the majority and the rule of the minority also, and the rule of parliament. It is a very complex architecture which involves, which knows evolutions throughout time, which enriches itself. And the difference between democracy and all sorts of authoritarianism, including the one of Putin in Russia today, is that democracy is always open, and always open to change, always open to progress, always open to enrichments, or withdrawals, all of that. And about nihilism, let's agree on one point. You speak of Nietzsche, who did not say that man killed the gods, by the way, but God, which is a very different thing. But the best definition of nihilism for me, we know it. We have it in our memory. Russia, with his 24 million of deaths during the Great Patriotic War. Us in Europe, occupied by the Nazism. The Jews, my people, nearly exterminated. There is one definition of nihilism, which is those who committed these crimes, which means the Nazis. And the Nazis means they did not come from the sky of Thule or of Tibet. They came from ideologists, from Carl Schmitt, from Spengler, from Stuart Chamberlain, from Karl Haushofer. All people which I'm sorry to know, to see that you like, and you quote, and you inspire yourself of their works. So for me, when I say that you are a nihilist, when I say that Putin is a nihilist, when I say that there is in Moscow a morbid atmosphere of nihilism, which creates, by the way, some real deaths, Anna Politkovskaya, Mr. Nemtsov, and so many others killed in Moscow or in London every day, I mean it. And I mean that, alas, for this great Russian civilization today, there is a bad, dark wind of nihilism in its proper sense, which is a Nazi and the fascist sense, which is blowing on this great Russia.
I agree. I think that phenomenon of fascism and National Socialism, I agree, it is nihilism. I agree, and I don't defend that, because it is modern phenomenon. In my eyes, all modernity is purely nihilist. And liberalism is nihilist, communism is nihilism, and fascism as well. And I think that I agree with you about the crimes committed by Hitler, because my people as well suffered a lot. We have lost many, many millions of the people killed because they were Slavs, as exactly on the same scale as they were Jews. And our people, Soviet people, Russian people, fought this patriotic war in order to stop the fascism in Europe, in Russia, and as well to save all the peoples suffering in that situation. And I strongly blame all kind of racism. So if I find something interesting in Heidegger and Schmitt in conservative revolution in Germany, it is the points of some political realism, on some geopolitical thought, on some traditionalism, and the criticism of modernity that was proper to this conservative movement, but not the racism. I always, in all my books, I always stress And if I am bold enough, if I would fascist or racism, to recognize that. I am making many bold statements. I am blamed for them. I am against liberalism, against individualism, against human rights as ideology, but I am against racism too. And that is clear. I don't defend that. But I don't think that racism I blame, because it is Anglo-Saxon liberal construction based on the hierarchy between the people. I think this is criminal. And I think that the same crime now, the globalism, repeats, because what globalists, the liberals, as yourself and the people who support your ideas, now try to affirm as universal values are simply modern Western liberal values. And that is a kind of new kind of racism, cultural, civilizational racism. You say, you affirm, everybody who accepts open society, they are good guys. All who challenge the open society, they are, as Popper in the subtitle of his book says, they are enemies of open society. So there's a new Manichaean division, that new racism. Who is in favor of Western values, they are good. Everybody who challenged that in Islamic tradition, in Russian tradition, in Chinese tradition, in Indian tradition, in everywhere, they are populist and they are classified as fascism. I think that is new racism.
Oh, my dear. There is really three real points of disagreement. First of all, I'm sorry, but when you speak of globalization, you have a short idea of it. Globalization does not mean, there is a bad globalization, of course, which means uniformization of the world. But globalization, as a lot of Western thinkers conceive it, like, as I conceive it, like many people here in Amsterdam conceive it, means not an uniformity, means an openness to the other, means some bridges between civilization, means some nexus between cultures, means some importation, exportation of words, theorems, and so on. This is what globalization can mean too. And believe me, we are very numerous in the West to battle for that. Number two, when you say that to believe in universal values is a new form of totalitarianism and so on, I'm sorry, but this is so short. The real point is that in every civilization, there are some great things which have been invented. Your civilization, the Russian one, which is a proper civilization, great, which I revere and respect, invented, for example, through Alexander Solzhenitsyn, one of my masters, invented the very idea of the fight against totalitarianism. It's huge what Solzhenitsyn did, and nobody will steal that hugeness from Russian culture. So many Western thinkers tried to think freedom against totalitarianism, what is a camp, and so on. It belongs to a Russian man to have produced this masterpiece, which was the archipelago of Gulag. Nobody will take that from Russian civilization. On the same sense, Europe invented a few things also, which are gains for humanity. For example, equal rights between women and men. For example, the right for a body not to be tortured, not to be enchained or enslaved. This right has been invented, has been produced by a philosophy which has been called the philosophy of enlightenment, and which birthplace was Europe. So the idea is not to impose a pattern on another one, it is to take in every civilization the good for the rest of humanity that it invented. And about, I'm happy to hear that you don't like racism, but I'm not so sure that you are sincere. I read a few days ago a book of you called La Révolution conservatrice in French, page 256 and 56, where you spoke about Jews. I'm not only concerned about Jews, I'm concerned about all, but this one was about Jews, and about the metaphysical rivalry and war between Aryans, and Jews. And you said that this was a challenge, that this was a debate of not of the century, but of the time. This is anti-Semitism. And I'm not surprised, because all the men which you quoted and from which you draw your inspiration, Spengler, Heidegger, who is also a great philosopher, of course, and others, they are contaminated, corrupted, infected by this plague, which is anti-Semitism. And alas, you too. And in your debates with Alain de Benoit in France, with your connections with Alain Soral, who prefaced one of your books and who is one of the, alas, of the leaders of the French anti-Semitism, all of this perspires. So how can you say that racism is foreign to you?
So absolutely foreign to me. As well, I think that I believe that people have their angels.